am pleased to introduce today Christie Nicoson, who is the Program and Operations Director at World Without Genocide, a human rights organization headquartered at William Mitchell College of Law. The organization educates people about past and current conflicts and advocates at the local, state, and national levels to prevent genocide and prosecute perpetrators. Christie also helps Minnesota Senator Sandy Pappas with the international program Forward Global Women, a convening of women peacemakers from the Middle East and North Africa. As a volunteer, Christie directed a youth mentoring program with the YMCA and coordinates Rotary service projects with community partners that include Habitat for Humanity. Christie is a 2014 Carl Wilkins Fellow, an honor named for the only American to remain in Rwanda during the genocide. In this capacity, she advocates for anti-genocide policies. She was also awarded Citizen of the Year in 2014 by the Minneapolis University Rotary Club for her service to the community. Christie received her Bachelor of Arts in Global Studies from the University of Minnesota and has been awarded a Rotary Peace Fellowship to pursue her graduate degree. As we heard earlier from Dawn, she is one of 50 people selected this year from around the globe for a fully funded academic scholarship. She will start her master's degree in Peace and Conflict Studies at Uppsala University this fall. Welcome.
Great. Thank you all so much for that warm welcome. I'm really glad to be here today. We will be talking about a topic that I have been researching and speaking about for the better part of this year now. About religion and genocide in Syria and Iraq. But to start out with, I just wanted to give a shout out to Rotary and all of you because you're the ones who made it possible for me to start my master's program this fall. So I'm one of 50 students, 3 from this district, who will be receiving Rotary Peace Fellowships. I will be going to Uppsala in Sweden to study peace and conflict. And so I'll be in Sweden, and the other 5 Rotary Peace Centers are around the world in the UK, one in Japan, one in Australia, and then one here in the US. So please, if you know anyone who is interested in pursuing a career in the peace and conflict field or in human rights and is interested in the work of Rotary, do pass on the word about the Peace Fellowships. Ellen Kennedy, who is a guest from Minneapolis University Rotary Club, chairs the Peace Fellow Committee for the district. And they've just wrapped up for this year accepting applications for the 2016 round, but they will be accepting for the following year for the 2017 cycle in April of next year. So if you start getting the word out now, it gives everyone an opportunity to get their applications in order and to meet with clubs for sponsorship. So as was mentioned, I currently work at World Without Genocide. We're a human rights nonprofit headquartered in St. Paul. And we do education and advocacy to remember conflicts that happened in the past and to try and end those that are happening today and prevent future conflicts. I do a lot of work with high school and college students and educate the public, and I also advocate at the local, national, and state level to promote peace and to try and achieve the goals of Rotary, really, to make the world a better place. So this afternoon we'll be talking about Syria and Iraq, two neighboring countries in the Middle East which have been in the news for quite a while now. So we want to talk a little bit more about what's causing the crises in that region. It's largely been cast as sectarian in nature, religious groups or racial groups fighting each other. But I want to talk more about the ultimate causes, what's underneath that and what's really driving the conflict. So we'll start by talking about climate change, which has brought extreme weather to the region, including droughts and floods. This has resulted in decreased food production. It's been coupled with increased population rates, political instability, and finally, the most serious refugee crisis of this century. Syria and Iraq share water resources, so they're part of an interconnected system in the region of rivers, water tables, rainfall. When one part of the region suffers, the rest of the area feels the same impact. This past year has been the warmest and the driest winter on record in Syria and in Iraq. There's been an increase in extreme weather, including severe droughts, floods, dust storms, and sandstorms. This map shows the hot spots for water shortages in the region. The red area, which is also circled in yellow, is where Syria and Iraq is, and the red indicates the part of the area that has had the most severe water shortages, the most severe droughts. These maps compare rainfall over a 2-year period in Syria. The map on the left shows moderate rainfall that was typical in 2006-2007. And on the right, you see 2007 to 2008, the average rainfall. And it's completely devoid of what was average the year before. In neighboring Iraq, the people are starting to rely almost completely on other countries for their water. Iraqis only receive 10% of their water from their own country. And a large part of it is coming from Turkey because of severe water loss. So when water resources run dry, one of the most easily identifiable consequences is that we don't have drinking water. This is in an area that already suffers a lack of access to clean drinking water, which I know is something that Rotary focuses a lot on. And Syria and Iraq have both had trouble accessing clean drinking water. And during these periods of severe droughts, that's even more difficult to access. However, a much more serious conflict is on the lack of water that's available for agriculture. Agriculture requires an enormous amount of water. During droughts and periods of water shortages, there's less water for irrigation and to maintain healthy, productive farmland. This means that there's less arable land and less water to use to produce food. On this map, the darker regions indicate where they have suffered the worst impacts of drought in Iraq. This map is of Syria, and it shows where most of the food is produced. So the green regions are where most of the agriculture land is. And this map shows you where water shortages have occurred. Red indicates severe drought, and orange is moderate drought. Note that the entire country of Syria is suffering drought at some level, and most of the agricultural land has suffered severe drought. When water shortages dry up the land, rural farmers can't grow enough crops to make money. So we have shortage of food, and we also have farmers who are leaving their land for the cities. This causes a great drag on food stores because there just isn't enough food being produced to maintain food stores at the needed level. In the coming years, we predict even less rainfall and more frequent droughts. This means crop failures and a loss of seed and food stocks. When farmers leave their land and stop producing enough food, they turn to the international community for help. Sometimes that's purchasing food, and sometimes it's looking for food aid. So asking the rest of the world to reach out and to help supply people with food so that they have enough to eat. This impacts the home country's economy and stability, and it also affects ours. Because as we're sending more food abroad through food aid programs, there eventually will be more of a strain on our own system, and the cost of our food will increase. Natural resources, as I'm sure we all know, also play an important role in this region. Iraq has the 5th largest proven crude oil reserves in the world, and it's currently the world's 7th largest oil producer. It churns out about 3.3 million barrels per day. Syria also has many gas and oil reserves. And because Syria is neighbors with other countries that are rich in oil, it's in a particularly vulnerable position. A recent pipeline project crossed through 3 countries, ending in Syria, and it was projected to be worth about $10 billion. This is in a country that was already experiencing political instability and high corruption, and this single project alone was $10 billion. Around 2011, all of these factors collided. So we had climate change affecting the land and the water, reduced food stocks, the new pipeline deal, and population rates that were increasing in Syria and Iraq for the last 60 years at rates that were unmatched anywhere else in the world. In Iraq, this happened during the US-led invasion, which ousted Saddam Hussein and toppled the government. This marked the start of years of violent conflict with different groups competing for power. And in the struggle for power, the conflict took on an increasingly sectarian nature. Different groups were pitted against each other. Saddam Hussein was executed in 2006 for crimes against humanity, and then US President Bush announced a new strategy deploying more troops to the country. We know that these troops eventually pulled out by the end of 2011, and soon after, following that, when the troops moved, 200 people were killed in bombings targeting Shia Muslims. So that's what we have going on in Iraq. And in neighboring Syria in the spring of 2011, President Bashar al-Assad was focusing on global trade. So he was focused on international interests while people at home were hungry. They were starving, many were poor, they lacked basic human rights like access to clean water, education, healthcare, and they became very angry. And 2011 is around the time when we had the Arab Spring. 2011 is when reports started coming out about the Syrian government's attacks on civilians. The UN reported the use of gunfire against unarmed civilians, door-to-door arrest campaigns, shootings of medical personnel who aided the wounded, torture, sexual violence, arbitrary arrest, and murder. Toward the end of this year and in the beginning of 2012, the government shifted from sporadic violence to more targeted, large-scale killings. Reports came out about massacres in Houla in July of 2012 and in Aleppo in 2013. Human Rights Watch, one of the world's most important human rights organizations, began reporting on the use of torture in 27 different detention facilities that were operated by Syrian intelligence agencies. These abuses came from the Syrian military and security forces that could be traced up to high-level officials. It was clear that the Syrian government was targeting their own civilians. So why is Assad targeting his own people? Well, when the protests broke out in 2011 during the Arab Spring, the regime started a crackdown. The protesters were demanding a reform to Assad's regime and, among other things, release of political prisoners. Assad's forces opened fire on the protesters, killing many civilians, and this led the opposition to Assad's government to create armed groups. And the fighting continued to escalate until it reached a full-fledged civil war. One of the most notorious incidents that you may be familiar with was in 2012 when President Obama declared that Assad had crossed a red line by using chemical weapons on civilians. This includes the use of toxic and poison gas like sarin, nerve gas, tear gas, and mustard gas. The use of chemical weapons goes against every international law. And although this is deplorable, and I think we all agree that this is beyond the scope of what we would like to see a government doing to their own people, this came after thousands had already been targeted by the regime. So thousands of people had already been killed by their own government after they before they quote-unquote crossed the red line. So after urging from the international community, after this incident, the Assad regime, Syria, said that they disbarred the use of chemical weapons, or they destroyed them all. But after this deal, reports have continued. As recently as the end of March, and some in April as well, the Syrian American Medical Society reported on the ongoing use of chemical agents. Many victims show symptoms of exposure to chlorine gas and other chemicals. The Medical Society reported that at least 5 attacks happened in a 10-day period in March. The regime has not disbarred their weapons. They have increased attacks and use other weapon offenses, including barrel bombs and cluster munitions. The government has also blocked access to food and has used starvation as an intentional weapon against its people. Since 2013, the Syrian armed forces have prevented the movement of food and medical supplies from entering many cities. That's since 2013. These actions have caused the price of food to go sky high in a region where many people were already in poverty and had trouble accessing food and other resources. According to Amnesty International, by late 2013, a single pound of rice cost between 35 and 50 US dollars. Same amount of food in the US we get for about $2. In January of 2014, many people had not had access to fruit or vegetables in as long as a year. People who do attempt to seek food put themselves at risk of being shot by snipers. In addition to food being inaccessible, we also have an attack on the electricity. Since the conflict began 4 years ago, 83% of the lights in Syria have gone out. The map on the left shows the country in 2011 and on the right in 2014. You'll notice that in Aleppo in the north, 97% of the lights have gone out from 2011 to 2014. And in Damascus in the south, there's been a 35% decrease in light. Since this uptick in violence and instability in 2011, more than 9 million Syrians have fled their homes. About 6.5 million are internally displaced within their own country, and over 3 million people have had to flee to neighboring countries or to the European Union. Refugees live in camps that lack basic humanitarian services. Many refugees suffer from acute malnutrition, lack of access to clean water, and denial of many other basic human rights, including medical assistance. In June of 2014, a new era of instability occurred when ISIS came into the region. The group actually dates back to 1999 when they formed in Iraq, where they believed that the Sunni should be the ruling majority. Iraq is a Sunni organization, but in reality, Sunnis are a minority group in the region. ISIS's reign of terror stemmed from the false belief that Sunnis should be in power and that they should reap the benefits of that power. The principal goal of the organization is to create a caliphate, which is a religious and political state that adheres to an extreme interpretation of Sharia law. According to ISIS, it achieved its goal on June 19, 2014. This map shows the area that ISIS claimed to control as of last summer. It's important to note that ISIS represents only a very small portion of Muslims worldwide. The CIA estimates that ISIS currently has about 31,500 fighters, although some estimates place it as high as 200,000. But compare this, either number, to the worldwide population of 1.6 billion Muslims. ISIS represents a minuscule percent of the worldwide Muslim population, and because of the violent measures taken by ISIS, almost all Muslims openly reject ISIS's interpretation of Islam. ISIS has captured many oil fields and pipelines in northern Syria and throughout Iraq to gain resources and money and to take control of the region. The group makes about $2 million a day by selling oil on the black market from these pipelines that they've taken control of. You can see on this map that the orange indicates where ISIS holds control of pipelines and oil fields. Another way that ISIS makes its money is by abducting women and girls and selling them on sex slave markets. This slide shows the price at which ISIS sells women and girls. Largely by using social media to recruit fighters, ISIS has been able to bring in about 1,300 from the West, including 200 from the United States, and approximately 10% of these new recruits are women. Of those who ISIS targets to recruit, the common denominator is that they are young, minimally educated people who are looking for an identity and to be part of something bigger than themselves. These are the same people who are targeted for gang activity. ISIS offers purpose and belonging to these young people. This past year, ISIS has been targeting Yazidis, a religious minority mostly in northern Iraq. The UN reports that ISIS has routinely rounded up hundreds of Yazidi men led them to nearby ditches, and executed them. Witnesses say that orders come through by telephone, telling soldiers what to do. It's clear that the attacks are not spontaneous, but that are carefully planned. ISIS has also forced other religious minorities to convert or forcibly displace them from their villages or executed them. Again, this is in an effort to create that caliphate that we talked about before. Many women and girls, Yazidis, and other minorities are abducted and sold into sexual slavery. In March, the UN accused ISIS of genocide for their attacks targeting the Yazidis. The body has called for ISIS to be prosecuted at the International Criminal Court, the world's only permanent international tribunal that's located in The Hague in the Netherlands. The UN also reported that the Syrian government may be responsible for war crimes, citing credible accounts of executions, sexual violence, torture, abductions, and indiscriminate attacks on civilians. And that's what we talked about with the Assad regime targeting its people. So the international response to these crimes, what's happening, right? The United Nations has condemned the acts but hasn't yet taken strong action. The Arab League has been present since 2011 when this began, but it has been unable to prevent further bloodshed. The US and other international actors have initiated a peace conference that was in 2013, but it was unsuccessful in reaching a peaceful agreement. This past fall, the US formed a coalition to try and beat ISIS. Other partners included Canada, Britain, France, Australia, and a number of other countries. The US will not send troops, but will support large-scale military intervention. This includes airstrikes, foreign intelligence, financial resources, and border control from neighboring countries. The coalition has reportedly forced ISIS out of more than a quarter of the land that they had controlled in Iraq. The goal is to cut off key roads, checkpoints, dams, staging grounds, and entire cities held by ISIS to pave the way for Iraqi forces to go back in and take control. There have also been small successes in Syria. With the support of Western allies, Kurdish fighters, Iraq, and Iranian forces, they're working to push ISIS out of key Syrian cities. You may have seen the news over the weekend that US forces eliminated a key ISIS official in Syria. You may have also seen that ISIS claims to have taken control of Ramadi, which is a city in Iraq. So progress remains complicated, but with this coalition, we're seeing that indeed the US and our partners abroad are making some progress. A major focus remains on building strong relationships with neighboring countries. The US is working not only with the coalition of partners that I mentioned before, but also on building partnerships with Arab countries. In particular, in this picture you see Kerry with leaders of 10 Arab nations. A large part of the future plan for peace includes positioning local people from ISIS-freed regions to take part in government. That includes people from the many different minority ethnic groups in the region. There are many more effective ways to intervene for peace than sending in troops. I advocate for the use of diplomatic exclusion, economic sanctions, and regional negotiations. I encourage political action to intervene peacefully. One of the best ways to start this is through education, through talking about what you hear in the news and through educating yourself so that you can spread the word to others. And that's part of what I do now at World Without Genocide. Each summer we host an institute for high school and college students to focus on different human rights issues, different genocides that happened in the past and that are happening today, to teach students not only what's going on around the world, but also to link it to what's happening in their own hometowns, in their communities, and to teach them what they can do about it. This program has been supported for the past 3 years by Minneapolis University Rotary Club. They provide us support to put on the program, and members of the club are proud sponsors at the event. This year our topic will be religions and genocide, the very topic that I've come to talk to you about today. We'll focus on the Armenian genocide during World War I, the Holocaust during World War II, and this issue about what's happening right now, the crises in Iraq and Syria. These are all three conflicts that have been labeled sectarian, one religious group fighting another. But with our students, we're going to look at these ultimate causes of climate change, political instability, and resources, and how that plays a part in the conflict, and how it can play a part in leading to a solution and to peace. So the conference, the Institute, takes place August 11th through the 13th, and students will learn about religions and genocide, and they will build the leadership skills to create change in their own communities and to promote peace around the world. So there are brochures on all of your tables. I'm sure all of you know young people, or you know teachers or educators or others who work with young people who might be interested in this. And as Rotarians, I know that it's part of your, you proudly try to make the world a more peaceful place, which is exactly what we try to do with the Summer Institute. So please take a brochure if you're interested, if you would like to share it with others that you know. And if you have any questions about that, I would be happy to talk to you. It's this brochure at your table. So I think I will turn it over. I'd be happy to stick around for a few minutes at the end to take any questions that you might have on an individual basis.
A couple of minutes, take a few questions.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you so much. I've really appreciated the comments that you've made and with additional insight. It sounds to me like a key root cause is water, which then creates food issues and population increase. And so it would seem, this is probably a very naive question, but it would seem like that really is where a lot of focus should be placed, is around solving those basic issues. What's being done with respect to the lack of water, lack of food, population?
Well, you've really hit it on the head. When it comes to water insecurity, much of it is caused by climate change, which is a long-term problem that few countries have done taken substantial measures to address. And that's something that there have been talks that began last year and that will continue this year around setting new goals to help combat climate change. But because of the droughts and floods, access to water for drinking and water for agriculture is really a problem. And as you pointed out, that affects agriculture production, the food that we all need to eat, because we're such an interconnected global economy that the food that we produce in any part of the world reaches the rest. Population increase, I think, is a related but separate issue, and that the two of them, when they come together, really sort of create a perfect storm for this political instability and conflict that we've seen. There are organizations, I believe, like Rotary, who are working to create change around these causes. In terms of governments that are taking action, it's much harder to see because these are longer term goals. It's easier to send in and try and affect change in immediate conflicts, right? So sending humanitarian aid, which is desperately needed for these 6 million refugees, to send food when they need it now rather than to have done it, a long time ago in order to create a situation where they didn't need it in the first place. So in terms of what's being done, I think the climate change talks that we're about to have later this year are a great step. And we have been having talks like that for a while. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of them. Yeah.
Do you know what percentage the population has been increasing, and is it because of people wanting more children? I can't believe they would. Or is it the rapes that are causing increased pregnancy, or do you know any of that?
I don't have the rates for population increase offhand. I know that in the last 60 years, the rates in Syria and Iraq were the highest anywhere else in the world, which is just staggering when you think about other parts of the world where we see population increase. The first one that comes to my mind is India, that we think about the population boom that's happened there. I think a large part of it comes through development, and that people are having more children as they move to urban areas. But I don't have the rates at which that's occurring in Iraq and Syria.
Maybe one more question?
Sure.
Grimaldi was taken today, by the way. ISIS? Well, was it-
Ramadi.
Ramadi.
Mhm.
Ramadi or Ramadi?
Ramadi, yes, in Iraq over the weekend, yeah. Mm-hmm.
How long's your program? How
The Peace Fellowship?
Yes.
Great question.
And what are you gonna do when you finish it?
Sure. My program is 2 years. So the Peace Fellowship supports a fully funded program for the duration of a program at one of the 5 universities. So mine just happens to be for 2 years. The others range from a year up to 2 years. So mine will be for 2 years starting in August, and I'll be focusing on peace and conflict with hopefully an internship in between. That's part of the Peace Fellow program, is that you have that experience, the experiential learning part at an internship. And afterwards, I hope to go into food policy. So looking at how agriculture and policies around food affect human rights, whether for peace or for conflict, and moving us towards protecting human rights through our food choices.
Thank you.
Great, thanks so much.
You'll stick around?